Hey guys, this is the story of Don Fury Studio. Hope you like it. 1989 was a phenomenal year for the studio. We did EPs for In Your Face on Common Cause Records, for Go on New York Records, for Slipknot on Revelation Records, for Bad Trip on Bell Bottom Records, and for Helmet on Amphetamine Reptile Records. I was telling all the bands I knew on the hardcore scene about Helmet and how they should go see Helmet and what a fantastic band they were. And they made fun of me. They didn't like the name and they weren't a hardcore band, so I had to keep trying to talk to them about it. A year later, they would come back to the studio and be like, "Hey, did you go to the Helmet show? Wow, that was so awesome." The Helmet 7-inch was born annoying, and it actually wasn't like Helmet later. You know, it was Helmet's first EP, and it was kind of punk rock or grungy or just dirty. I mean, it sounded like what it was, which was a basement record, recorded 8-track, and just raw and nasty sounding. We actually did a couple of extra recordings right before they got signed to Interscope. I'm not really sure those ever got out there. They're still around here somewhere. They're pretty awesome. '89 was also a fantastic year for comps. Where the Wild Things Are came out on Blackout Records, and I recorded Gorilla Biscuits for that record, and maybe Life's Blood and Sheer Terror also. Some of these records don't have credits on them, and my memory is just not that good. But I guess the most quintessential comp was New York City Hardcore, The Way It Is, on Revelation Records. What a fantastic record. I recorded NAUSEA, Warzone, Gorilla Biscuits, Youth of Today, Side by Side, Youth Defense League, and maybe the song Politics by Sick of It All. I'm not sure. There's no credit on that one, and I can't remember. You know, comps were really important to the New York hardcore scene, and there were quite a few of them. I'd have to say, though, that The Way It Is edges them out, maybe by just a little bit, for the top spot. It was that good. I also did a couple of really cool all-girl punk rock and roll bands in 1989. I did an LP for BLOODSISTER for my friend Steve Gabe's label 109, and I also did a double EP for the LUNACHICKS for Blast First, and we're going to talk about the LUNACHICKS record in a little bit. I also remixed a project for Trip 6. I love those guys, Tommy Rat, Stu Psycho, Charlie Rage, Zippy. They had recorded in another studio a couple of years back or a year back and brought it into Don Fury Studio for me to remix. And that kind of brings me around to the rest of this chapter. I want to talk about 4 bands, a bunch of projects, how I got called in on those projects, and what that meant to me in the studio. In 1988, Porcell called me up about Youth of Today and the record Can't Close My Eyes. Porcell wanted to re-record all the guitars and remix it because it was going to come out on Caroline Records. It had originally been recorded in an 8-track format so we could work on it at Don Fury Studio at 18 Spring Street. So Porcell came over with this guitar, we recut all the guitars, and we remixed Can't Close My Eyes, and just the two of us. Youth of Today had already worked in the studio doing some compilation cuts for Revelation, and I had worked with Porcell and Mike Judge on the Judge EP, New York Crew. So it was nice that I got the call from Porcell and that he trusted me and trusted the studio with recutting this record and remixing this record, because it was going to be an important release for Youth of Today. It was coming out on Caroline Records in 1988, and then later on Revelation Records. And this was going to be the final form. the form that Porcell and I did together at 18 Spring Street. So that was successful, and a few years later I would get a call from Porcell again, and he and I would jump in a van and go to upstate New York and remix Break Down the Walls. And that's the current version that's out on Revelation Records right now. Porcell and I worked on so many projects together. Youth of Today, Judge, Project X, Ray and Porcell, all the Shelter records. We even did a compilation cut for Bold in my Coney Island studio. There's a lot of history. So in 1989, I got a call from a label called Blast First about the Lunatics. The Lunatics are a badass, all-girls, punk rock and roll band. And they had been rehearsing in my studio at 18 Spring Street, maybe for a year, doing cassette tapes. Blast First had signed them, and they were in a studio on the Lower East Side working on their first double EP. Or double single, it's a 7-inch, 2 7-inches. And they were having a hard time getting through it. And the label called me up and they were like, well, we want you to go over and work with the band. And I was floored because I've always been the engineer. I was never called to work in someone else's studio. This was the first time. I was literally being called to be a producer. And I was like, are you sure you want to do that? I wasn't too crazy about Blast First, but I liked the Lunatics a lot, and we had worked together for a long time at Spring Street. So I said, okay, let's go. I'll go over to the studio and we'll make something happen. And after a lot of trial and error, trial on the band's part and error on mine, and I have to say the girls were absolutely fantastic, and Cindy was awesome for putting up with my inexperience. And the Lunatics went on to kill it. I mean, they were a great band on stage, and they made lots of cool records. And I was pretty psyched to be there right at the beginning. Underdog, one of the best bands ever. In 88 or 89, they came in to do pre-production for Vanishing Point, or demos for Vanishing Point. And I think they demoed every song at 18 Spring Street in 8-track format. And those demos are awesome. I've been listening to them recently, and Richie sounds great vocally. I mean, the guitars sound, growling. The energy level is fresh, Yes, they're not as slick as a 24-track version, but they just sound amazing. I love them. So the band got signed to Caroline Records, probably on those demos. And Caroline Records wasn't a little company. They had actually offices in Chelsea and Manhattan, and like secretaries and people with phones and stuff like that. It was a real label. And they weren't going to send the band back to an 8-track studio to record their first LP for Caroline Records. And I think the band wanted to record 24-track also. And so they booked Electric Reels, a studio in upstate New York, to go and record Vanishing Point. And then I got a call from the band, and they said, listen, Fury, we want you to come upstate with us and work on the record, especially for bass and drums. And I thought, bass and drums, well, that's okay. I'm pretty good with guitars and vocals, too. But I said, they're great guys. And I was like, okay, yeah, let's go. So we went up together, and the bass and drums came out great. And to be honest, I probably would have stayed for the whole record. But within a day or two after I got to Electric Reels, I had the most violent toothache you could imagine come on. I think I was like, it felt like there was like a fire in my mouth. I wanted to stay, and I think I would have stayed, and I think I should have stayed, because there was a little bit of controversy going on about Richie's new Roland GP16, which was one of the first rack-mounted amp modeling devices that ever came on the market. It was a very transistorized sounding unit, and he fell in love with it, and the band felt a little dubious about it. And I wish I had stayed to talk to Richie a little bit more about the GP16. But I was eating like 50 Advils a day, and in fear of my life or my face falling off. So I ended up going back to Manhattan a little early, to get that taken care of. So the band finished up guitars and vocals, and they did a great job. I mean, Vanishing Point is a really well-made record. So when the band got back to the city, they decided they wanted to mix in the city if they could. And they called me up and said, hey, do you know of any place we can go which we can afford? So I called my good friend Melanie Rock, who was managing Sunset Productions, which was on the east side of Manhattan, uptown. And she gave us the midnight shift, I think for 5 or 6, maybe even 7 days. So we busted our asses for, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nights in a row. And we probably stayed a little late the last night, and then we took a cab home at sunrise. So we're coming home together in a cab on FDR on the east side of New York with the river, on one side of us and the sun coming up. And I can't tell you what it feels like. It's a cross between elation and sadness. It's like you just finished the moon shot and they picked you up and you landed on the aircraft carrier. It's a really, really unique experience. This was only the second time I had been called out of my studio to produce a record. And it really struck me about how fast the scene was moving. I was in the car.